The Imperial Fists have been a standout legion throughout the Horus heresy, with a marked number of engagements and sieges that echo out now deep into the 41st millennium that the lore currently resides in. While Rogaldorn is the head of the Imperial Fists, there is one character that stands out amongst not only the other Imperial Fists, but the other Astartes of the time, Brother Captain Sigismund, first captain of the Imperial Fists Legion. In this video today, we're going to go into the wide-spanning legacy of the very first Emperor's Champion. And I'm really excited to go through this with you guys, as he's been a character that I've loved for a long time. Deep in the earliest lore of the Emperor's Champion, when the Black Templars were first being fleshed out, he was named simply Sigismund. But as time passed, we come to realize the true lore behind this character. From his bright beginning in the Imperial Fists to his heroic death, Sigismund is an amazing character, so let's dive in on some of his lore. Now, we don't know much about the early life of Sigismund, that's yet to be written, but what we do know is that he was a Terran-born Marine, rather than the native Inuit planet that the Imperial Fists hail from. Most of the lore suggests that he became an Imperial Fist after the rediscovery of Dorne, so he's certainly not the oldest Marine in the Legion, but definitely one of the most deadly. Since his early years as a rank-and-file Marine all the way to his ascendancy as the first captain of the Imperial Fists, Sigismund has been known for his swordsmanship as well as his ferocity. Where his battle brothers are more reserved in engagements, Sigismund is a whirling tornado of destruction, dispatching the enemies of the Imperium in a dazzling flash of swords and fine sushi cutting skills honed over the many years of his service to the Emperor. Now, it's hard to put Sigismund on a scale when there are things as powerful as, Primarchs in the universe. But Sigismund's skill is second to none. The only person that was able to quote-unquote beat Sigismund in a duel was Sevitarion of the Night Lords. The two dueled without end for hours, like 20 hours or something ridiculous that it explains in the books. But eventually Sevitar got bored and headbutted Siggy, effectively ending the duel, but on the same coin, he did cheat. It's hard to say how these two would fare in an actual fight where their lives are on the line. Sevitar is known for his underhanded tactics, but that's something that Sigismund would absolutely consider. So it's kind of an interesting duel, or I guess situation to look at. The Sigismund's skill with the blade put him above his peers as a standout member of the Imperial Fists, and he was the direct right hand of Rogaldorn himself, as all first captains tend to be. Even Sanguinius remarks that Sigismund is less his brother's champion and more death itself, which is a pretty terrifying sentiment from a guy with wings. So you have this champion that is dedicated solely to the ideals of the Imperium, as well as the purity of combat. He leads the Templar Brethren, an elite squad of Imperial Fists, filled with all sorts of veterans and highly skilled individuals. So he's already at the forefront and leading the most skilled individuals in the Legion. So as the Great Crusade progressed, the Imperial Fists served alongside the World Eaters, and this would spawn a close kinship with Karn, the equerry of Angron, the Primarch of the World Eaters. Now, I've always really liked this about the lore. You have these two legions that are really on ends with the way that they wage war. The Imperial Fists are about calculated siege and defensive tactics, able to hold the line or break the defenses by losing as few casualties as possible. Then the World Eaters are a legion of mad berserkers, throwing themselves at every obstacle, drowning them out with the blood of the slain. And between these two vastly different credos, there becomes a common ground with Karn and Sigismund. Honestly, Karn seems to be the best voice of reason for the Legion, and we discover more and more through books like The Betrayer why exactly that is, but that's really a tale for another time. Needless to say, I really enjoy the portrayal of Karn as a provocative warrior that challenges the world, but is also subservient to his father as a means of connecting to him. And I think it's in that duality that Karn and Sigismund's friendship grows. Fighting closely together aboard the pits on the World Eater's flagship Conqueror, Sigismund carved a name for himself among the 12th Legion's gladiators, being dubbed the Black Knight. As Sigismund dueled through the fighting pits, the World Eaters' traditions of binding their weapons to their arms using chains became a mainstay for Sigismund. For the World Eaters, losing your weapon in battle was dishonorable, and it was also bad luck to pick up a discarded weapon, which Karn did. But these chains would go on to influence legions and chapters across the Imperium, becoming one of the biggest traditions of the Black Templars chapter, renaming them thusly to Devotion Chain. And up to this point, Sigismund has been the dutiful first captain of the Imperial Fists, standing out as a gleaming example of the tenets of the 7th Legion, but those virtues are about to be tested. In the opening engagement of the Horus heresy, Istvan III, and the flight of the Eisenstein, the galaxy learns the truth of Horus's treachery. Survivors Nathaniel Garro relay the information of Horus's betrayal, which sends Rogel Dorn into a fit of rage, almost killing the former captain of the Death Guard for his transgressions. As he marinated on the issue, like brooding over whether to go to Taco Bell or Del Taco, Rogel Dorn made a decision. It would be Taco Bell, and he would deliver a cheesy gordita-sized punishment to Horus. He ordered the creation of a retribution fleet, consisting of a third of the already massive 7th Legion, to bring Dorn's wrath to his wayward brother. Sigismund was to command this fleet and ensure that the deed was done. As the fleet mustered, Siggy has an engaging conversation with Euphrates Keeler, the woman who would soon become the first saint in the Imperial Creed many years later. Soon, many years later, same thing. She told the first captain of a premonition she had, if Sigismund left his father's side, he would die on a distant star, unknown and unremembered. The other choice would be to stay by his father's side, which would result in war without end. This shook Sigismund to the core. A man that was so resolute and confident in his decisions now doubted the judgment of his own father. Taking this information, Sigismund petitioned to his father to stay by his side. As a weird request as this was for Dorn, he trusted his first captain and replaced him with Captain Yonad, who would take the Retribution fleet onward to the Istvan system ahead of the other 3 legions already in pursuit. This would ultimately lead to the Battle of Fall, that's P-H-A-L-L, not F-A-L-L, the largest naval engagement of the entire Horus heresy. Perturabo squared off against Captain Alexis Pollux, taking command of the fleet after Captain Yonad's death. And had Sigismund been a part of the fleet as intended, they actually probably would have lost, as Perturabo had already known the course of action that Sigismund would have taken. He kind of guessed it out a little bit. Perturabo always kind of strategizing things ahead of time, and much to his own chagrin, losing. But Pollux was able to fight his way out of the trap and rejoin with the rest of the Legion on Terra after the events of Istvan V dropsite massacres unfolded, enveloping the galaxy in a full-blown civil war. Dorn's discovery of the massacre hit home hard. Half of the legions had turned traitor, 2 Primarchs were missing, with 1 dead, and 3 loyalist legions were out of commission. Rogel charged Sigismund with purging any traitorous elements from the Terran system, using any means necessary, and put the call out to the entirety of the 7th Legion, recalling them back to Terra as fast as possible. This is the distress call that Pollux received during the Battle of Fall, which causes him to retreat. The Imperial Fists were in a pretty advantageous position. They were known already for their renown as siege and defense experts, but they also had all the latest supplies from Mars itself, an edge that helped them during the Battle of Fall. So maintaining Mars' loyalty was of utmost importance to not just the 7th, but the Imperium as a whole. Elements of the Dark Mechanicus looked to end that loyalty and tear Mars asunder. Sigismund was charged with ensuring that did not happen, primarily securing the armor and ammo reserves on Mars for the eventual siege on Terra itself. Before departing to Mars, though, Sigismund had to tell his father of the real reason he did not accompany the Retribution fleet. Remember, the 7th Legion knows duty to no end, and the loyalty that comes from that. And this hung over Sigismund like a great weight, confronting his father and telling him the truth of his decision. Rogel Dorn was outraged. Dorn rebuked Sigismund, telling him that the selfish sentiments of following the superstitious prophecies of a witch, or so he called Keeler, were just as bad as the traitors that they had now faced. Throwing away loyalty and trust for a prideful end is the same motive that Horus operated under. And Rogel Dorn effectively says, it's not your decision to make. Your decision is to serve, always, is to be dutiful, is to be servile. And Sigismund offered his blade up to his father, begging him to take his life and the shame that he has brought upon the Legion. Rogel Dorn instead refused, denounced Sigismund as his son, and swore him to secrecy. He would not have the actions of one unravel the strength of many. He was afraid that if he publicly executed him and said, hey, this is what he did, it would cause fear throughout the ranks. If the greatest warrior of the Imperial Fists and really the other legions could fall victim to the same thing that Horus fell victim to, the quote-unquote greatest Primarch of the brothers, then who are any of the other Astartes? So Rogel Dorn was intelligent that he didn't want that fear to spread. Sigismund would continue to be the first captain, but he was no longer a son of Dorn. And while this greatly affected Siggy, I think that it ultimately sat well with him because he was alive and he could still be there for his father and the Imperium as a whole. And I'd argue that this whole situation with Euphrates Keeler sparks the road that the Black Templars would tread, and that they were staunch adherents to the Imperial Creed. Remember, all Marines at this point believed in the secular truth of the Imperium, but a growing portion of the Imperium fell more and more in line with the Imperial cult, believing the Emperor to be a god. And Euphrates Keeler's acts and ability to perform miracles such as healing right in front of people like Garo or Sigismund's eyes went a long way into paving the road that would become that distant future. And Marines are not Marines, but space Marines are very much a tangible people in the sense that they believe what they see. And if they're seeing these miracles before their eyes, you look at Garo. Garo goes on to lead or eventually create the fledgling Grey Knights, and Sigismund goes on to become the first High Marshal of the Black Templars. You have really the beginning of these religious or staunch religious sects of the Adeptus Astartes, and it's a very interesting kind of seed that is planted. Either way, Sigismund departed for Mars to battle the Dark Mechanicus that waged war against the Loyalist Mechanicus in the conflict known as the Schism of Mars. Sigismund was deployed with 4 companies of Imperial Fists to secure the forges of Mondus Oculum and Mondus Gamma, the locations where the bulk of the weapons and armor for the Astartes were produced. The Imperial Fists forces split in half, 2 companies landing on Mondus Oculum under Sigismund, and 2 at Mondus Gamma under Combadias, both accompanied with their own contingents of Imperial Guard. Combadias met immense resistance, fighting a grueling war of attrition that just barely saw him capture the forge before evacuating as much supplies as possible. Heavy losses were sustained, but the mission was an overall success. And Sigismund's forces met up with fabricator Locum Kane, who was still loyal to the Emperor. From Mondus Oculum, the Imperial Fists were able to retrieve well over 12,000 suits of Mark IV power armor, the most advanced armor of the time, and 24,000 weapons. A large traitor force comprising of Traitor Imperial Guard, armor, Scutarii, and Titan legions forced Sigismund off of Mondus Oculum, much to his own chagrin. And that's something I want to touch on real quick, is the unbridled fury that is within Sigismund. And this would go on to color the righteous zeal of the Black Templars, but there are many occasions where Sigismund is at war with his duty and what he personally wants as an agent of the Emperor's wrath, wreaking vengeance upon any of man's foes. With the mission on Mars, again, and ultimately a success, all that was left was to plan the Battle of Terra. And unfortunately, we don't have much of an idea of what exactly went on during the Battle of Terra. With the Horus Heresy series drawing to a close, we'll find out exactly what happened with some additional details. But one thing we know for certain is that Sigismund was appointed the Emperor's champion by Rogel Dorn. And whether this was done as a mark of penitence, a way to just redeem Sigismund, or rather a reward for redeeming himself, we do not know just yet. Sigismund took up the colors of the Reclusiarchy of the Imperial Fists, all black, with a white shoulder pad and Black Templar symbol, Sigismund's personal heraldry as a member of the Templar Brethren, and granted the Black Sword. The Siege of Terra went on as you would have expected it, but with Sigismund going from champion to champion yelling, "King me!" before lopping off each one of their heads. He killed over 24 champions, hunting each one down, and with each death, the Custodes shredded a rocking guitar solo that resounded through the Rebway, and okay, well, not really, but still, it was extremely badass. But in the post-heresy days of the 7th Legion, and after the events of the Iron Cage, which we covered in the Rogel Dorn video, there were only 5 remaining chapters of the 7th Legion. They were broken up into the Imperial Fists, Crimson Fists, Fists Exemplar, Excoriators, and finally the Black Templar chapters of the second founding. The Black Templars were comprised of the Imperial Fists elements that were filled with an overwhelming amount of zeal it's really inside of all Imperial Fists, but the Black Templars took up Sigismund's personal heraldry, and the tradition of naming an emperor's champion was passed down through the chapter for many centuries to come. And so it came to pass that Sigismund became the first High Marshal and launched the longest standing crusade in Imperium history, a crusade that the Black Templars are constantly in prosecution of across the galaxy. And their aim is to purify the Imperium of the traitor, the Xenos, and the heretic. Suffer none to live in the eyes of the Black Templars. In the more recent lore, unfortunately, the Black Templars have become overly dogmatic and zealous, and it's actually kind of annoying. But even as early as the 7th edition lore, we had a much different Black Templars, a grand knightly brotherhood that fought closely as a cohesive unit, and a chivalric code that kind of lay at the foundation of the chapter made up the glory of the Black Templars of the 7th edition and earlier editions. Sigismund's legacy would be grand. For over the next 500 years, he would wage war eternal in the name of the Imperium. And this is a sentiment that I think that he knew would come in a lot of ways. During the first 3 books of the Horus Heresy series, we have a standout quote from Sigismund that is worth bringing up as a means of foreshadowing the world that we see, not only in 8th edition, but the world that we see for Warhammer 40,000.
We will spend our lives fighting to secure this Imperium, and then I fear we will spend the rest of our days fighting to keep it intact. In the far future, there will be only war.
And this is such a potent quote, because not only is it the closing phrase echoed throughout the lifetime of the game itself, but because this was a pivotal philosophical issue that is brought up in the beginning of the series. I mean, the Space Marines know they are a military force, but what is a military force good for in an age of peace? Easy, there can be none, either internal or externally. Sigismund knew this, even hundreds of years before it became a reality, that we would constantly be at war, and there would only be war. Either way, Sigismund's long tour of duty brought him to the head of the First Black Crusade, as Abaddon looked to steal back the stars that were robbed from his brothers by his cousins. And you have to remember that the Imperium at this time believed the traitorous legions were all but fractured and destroyed, not fearing their incursions. But Sigismund knew otherwise. He had been training his chapter for such an incident, the always preparedness of the Imperial Fists echoing down the bloodline. When the Black Legion entered real space, they faced the Black Templars first. Sigismund was feared by all of the other traitor Marines during the times of the Horus Heresy, and Abaddon was amongst that lot, knowing he could never best the Emperor's champion one-on-one. But time worked differently in the Warp, and although it had been 500 years, Abaddon had only aged a fraction of that. The clash between the High Marshal and the new War Master was titanic. It seemed to be a stalemate between Abaddon being the younger, stronger opponent, and Sigismund being the quicker and wiser one. Over the course of the fight, all 500 years of service weighed down heavily on Sigismund, and Abaddon was able to get the upper hand. With his back to the wall, Sigismund lunged upward, plunging his sword deep into the War Master's chest. To kill the War Master, the High Marshal exposed himself, which Abaddon took to, plunging the talon of Horus into Sigismund's midsection and bifurcating him across the deck of the Vengeful Spirit. With the duel at its end, Abaddon lamented that had Sigismund been any younger, he most certainly would have died to the Templar. Treating Sigismund with the most respect possible, even adorning him with the black sword. They didn't steal it or anything. Kind of rare. They sent the body of the High Marshal back to Terra with a message declaring, "We are returned." And this is the starting point of the long war between the traitor legions and the Imperium, which we go to see if you've looked at the 8th edition or pretty much any Space Marine Codex or Chaos Space Marines Codex. You see a special rule called Veterans of the Long War. And this is that long war that has been started with the First Black Crusade. And so passes the first captain, commander of the Templar Brethren, first Emperor's champion, and High Marshal of the Black Templars. Sigismund is a very important character in the lore of the early Imperium. And I didn't go into it during my exposition on the Horus Heresy, but Sigismund goes on to continuously use Imperial Fist resources to personally protect Euphrates Keeler from assassins. And this is a direct violation of his father's wishes. I mean, for a man born of duty and service, this is very uncharacteristic, but I think that Euphrates Keeler represents a growing and even more important part of the soon-to-become Imperial Creed. A creed that the Black Templars apply to themselves staunchly as this crusading knightly order of the Imperium. Sigismund's Legacy with the Black Templars is a heroic chapter that positions itself on the fringes of the Imperium, defending her planets in the way of a massive Orc, Xenos, and heretic invasions, or burning the borders of the Galactic Imperium outward. No matter how you look at it, Sigismund will always be a badass, immemorial as the first and arguably greatest Emperor's champion the galaxy has ever seen. So thanks so much for watching here today, guys. Hopefully you got a really good idea of who the hell Sigismund is, or if you already know who Sigismund is, hopefully you found out some tidbits. Or if you knew all this, hopefully you just had a good time. But as always, thanks so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.